Secrets of Life After Death. God, as the true parents for humanity, did not create death as a terrifying event. Human beings fell into the hands of Lucifer, and therefore they became victims of the evil environment. Otherwise, the separation of the spirit from the physical body to reach the eternal home would be the most wonderful moment for them. In the spiritual world, the spirit beings would live in the lap of God forever. Unfortunately, human history has gone in the wrong direction. As a result, man lost their relationship with God, and since living on earth, they have only been able to train their 5 external senses to live in this external world. However, their 5 inner senses are dead, and therefore this world is a very limited place. The understanding of people, their thinking, their opinion, and ways of looking do not go beyond the grave. Here is the final stop, where they have to leave their busy world behind. People ignore the spiritual world if, in the short time of their life on earth, they only care about the pleasure of their bodies. When death comes without making an appointment, no one is happy about it. Sadness, emptiness, and wonder arise. What will be next? Or, where am I going to go now? Fear surrounds people and hope fades away. This was also one of my main concerns while sitting in the forest waiting for God for many years. One night, the angels of death appeared to me there and stood in front of me. They were shining in a bright light, and their appearance was terrifying. I looked at them as silently as they looked at me. After a while, they broke the silence by asking me, "What are you doing here alone on such a dark night?" I replied, "I'm waiting for God to get the answer for His children." "Aren't you afraid of us?" they wanted to know from me. Instead of answering, I asked them, "Who are you?" They answered, "We are the angels of death and came here from our dimension. We are the ones who end the hectic daily routine of human beings and take them where they certainly don't want to go." I asked them, "Why did it take you so long to come to me? I have been waiting too long for you. Fortunately, I see you face to face now. Now tell me why you were sent to me." They replied, "We want to take you to unknown places in our dimension." I then said to them, "You cannot take me to another destination in the spiritual eternity where I don't want to be." They looked at me questioningly. "Why not?" I replied, "Every cell of my body and every spark in my soul shine in the color of God's love. That is why I have my destination in my own hands." They looked at me in silence for a while before saying, "You are a very wise man here on earth. We came here at the order of God to serve you and to familiarize you with all the secrets related to death and life after death." After that, they asked me to lie down in order to find out how death comes to human beings. They took me to the spiritual world where I could experience the following. It doesn't matter how human beings die. The process is always the same. When death appears to human beings, they feel like they fall in a very deep sleep. For the first time, they are afraid from such a sleep and want to wake up. This experience can be described like a heavy weight is on the body and it is falling downwards with high speed. The mind is in such a state as if it calls the body from thousands of miles away. There is barely contact. When the speed of the falling body becomes extremely high, it is a clear sign for this person that death is taking place. The spirit is compressed in the body like in a gas cylinder. The physical body symbolizes the cylinder here. A high speed is required for the mind to separate from the body. The observation at the moment of death is relative for every spirit. The bad spiritual beings stare into the darkness, and it seems to them that they are going through a dark tunnel, not knowing where they will end up. At that moment, many serious thoughts shoot through their mind. They inevitably recognize that death abruptly ended their supposedly successful life on Earth. Now it brings them into a new world for which they could not prepare. Right away, human beings are becoming very sensitive. Their whole personality begins to waver. All the speculations they made on Earth about death could not prepare them for this new, terrifying situation for them. They realize that they have to leave their old world in which they put their heart and energy behind them. They now see their complete helplessness, even though in their old world they thought they were free. They may were strong personalities on Earth who did many things to make their lives comfortable. But here they are standing powerless and with empty hands. In their old world they were surrounded by many people and their loved ones. Now nobody is at their side anymore. They are alone. On Earth they could talk as they wanted. They were free to do whatever they wished. They could spend their short life the way they liked it and thought it would last forever. For the first time they are meeting their own spirit, which they never tried to get to know on Earth. Now their old world is no longer attractive for them. The moment the arrow is shot from the bow, they suddenly want to get to know the purpose of their life. From this perspective, the death on Earth is our best teacher. When we think about death, questions come up in our mind like, why am I here? How can I fulfill the meaning of my life given to me by God? In search of the answers to these questions, people can get to know the hidden secrets of life. Death even teaches us what to do to find our everlasting happiness. Now I'm going back to the point where people are overtaken by death. As I mentioned earlier, the bad spiritual beings seem to be falling through a dark tunnel. It is not a tunnel, but a dark dimension where the spiritual beings arrive according to the dark color of the spirit. As soon as they touch the ground, they are attacked by millions of other dark spirits. It is just like angry bees which were annoyed and therefore sting the people. These dark dimensions are under the direct rule of Lucifer and his dark forces. Here the form of the evil spiritual beings reminds hardly of that of a human being. The spiritual beings live under constant violence and brutality in these dimensions. They try to kill each other just as if gangs are wiping each other out. In such dimensions there is no certainty, but only constant fear and never-ending pain. The spiritual beings can only fight each other, wound themselves and inflict pain on one another, but cannot die from it. For those who get there is no way to grow for the good. Hope is fading and the spiritual beings are getting worse. That is why they fall into ever lower dimensions. Relatively good spiritual beings, which have little depth, this can be seen from their spirit, have different destinations. For example, such spirits seem to pass through dark tunnels not knowing where they are going. At the end of this tunnel, they see a small light flashing far away. This light is the hope for the relatively good spirits to reach. Strictly speaking, this little light is one of the dimensions in which they find their destination according to their own light. in these dimensions, with little light, the arrival of the spiritual beings takes place like the landing of an airplane. These dimensions radiate light relatively, but they are surrounded by darkness. The angels of death take care of the arrived spiritual beings when they touch the floor of these relative dimensions of light. Once here, they have time for a maximum of 3 days before the angels of death decide in which part of these dimensions the spiritual beings have to live. There are endless of these dimensions. The spiritual beings cannot hide anything in the spiritual world. Here you can clearly see how a man or a woman spent their lives on earth. Seen in this way, the spiritual beings are naked in the spiritual world. Most of the time, you see dark spiritual beings in these dimensions. They look like black smoke with a little bit light glowing inside. The more higher these dimensions are, the more light you can see in the beings there. Such realms of the relatively good and evil spiritual beings are called the middle dimensions of the spiritual world. These dimensions potentially have as much light as the beings living in them. It is still difficult to grow spiritually here because the spiritual beings are surrounded in parallel by other spiritual beings with the same nature and habits. I saw countless dimensions according to the different nature of the spiritual beings. If I write down all my experiences, I will need countless books for all the details. Nevertheless, I would like to give some examples in the hope that these will help the people who live with their physical bodies on Earth. I flew to such medium dimensions where there's more darkness and little light. I saw human beings whose lungs contracted more and more as they breathed and became smaller as a result. Their eyes came out and it seemed as if they were falling out. It was very difficult for them to exhale and they needed all the strength to squeeze out the air. Their lungs were like balloons, and it seemed as if they couldn't exhale. The angels told me that these are the people who lived a very selfish life on earth. They misused and cheated other people for their own material benefit. These were people who had never learned to give, but only to take. This is where their agonizing breathing problems come from. In another dark dimension, I met people whose tongues hung out of their mouths as soon as they started talking. The tongues were long and split in two. As they talked, they pressed their hands to their heads, and from time to time they tore scraps of skin from their heads. I asked the angels what kind of people they are. They told me that in this realm there are political, committed people who were misusing their position and power. They led a double life and used the authority given to them for selfish purposes. That is why their split tongues hang out and they hurt their heads in the most terrible way by compulsively tearing skin and flesh off their heads. In a dark hell, I saw people cutting their own fingers and parts of their bodies with knives. Again, I asked the angels what kind of people come here. They replied that these people could control the world of the media. They were chosen to be the conscience of their nation to guide the people on the right path. But they misused the power of the media. They destroyed the lives of many people and influenced them to go in the wrong direction. Therefore, they cut off their own fingers and constantly injure various parts of their bodies. On Earth, they hurt society and the nation through their media power. Now they injure themselves to feel the torment they cause for the society and the world. In another dimension where I traveled, people looked very old. The skin wrinkled from their faces. Their sexual organs were black and an equal dark liquid came out of them. The angels said, "These are the people who put too much emphasis on their outward beauty. That's why their faces look old and ugly and the skin hangs in wrinkles from their faces. They followed their sexual debauchery. That's why a terrible stinking liquid flows out of their sexual organs." In one of the next dimensions where I traveled, people from different religions ate rotten, indigestible meat which they could not swallow. The angels explained to me, "Here are the religious people who fought with others on earth with the claim that their religion has the highest truth. But they never practiced this truth in their own lives. Now they have to eat the stinking, spoiled, raw, and indigestible meat without being able to swallow it. An ongoing terrible hunger is therefore their constant companion." My journey took me to another dimension. There, the followers of different religions shouted in the darkness for their Savior to take them to paradise. But no Redeemer comes here to free them because the law of the spiritual world is absolute. The believers of the different religions press their hands on their heads because they have terrible headache. The angels gave me the following reason. These religious people read the books of other religions only to find errors in them. They left no doubt about their own teaching. In their eyes, their belief was the best and only true one. For them, all other beliefs were a product of Satan. Ignorance, bias, and arrogance brought these religious people here. I saw Lucifer and countless evil spirits who, even here, are doing everything they can that the religious fanatic followers maintain the false belief that their religion is the only true one and stands above all other religions. I said to Lucifer, "You already brought destruction to humanity on earth. You sowed disunity there, tormented people with diseases and tempted them to follow an immoral way of life. But even here in the spiritual world, you don't leave them alone. Truly, you feel no pity for them. Your fallen angels and you are the reason for so much sorrow and sadness in the heart of God and also in the heavens." He replied, "All people who succumbed to my temptation and followed my evil ways are mine. They can no longer belong to God. They made the same mistakes as I did." I replied, "You know the whole truth. It will be the last day for your evil activities when religious people return to God, who is our original center." Lucifer said, "Before you, there were other mental sick prophets who believed that they could save the world. They didn't come very far. All religions came under my influence and that of the fallen angels and jinns. I have more rights on these religions than God, the heavens, and their prophets. Why don't you just get out of here? You and the presence of the angels disturb my followers." When I was about to leave, Lucifer called me back. "I want to suggest a compromise. If you agree, I will no longer stand in the way of you and your mission. Believe me, the true world of God is just a dream, a concept that can never be realized on earth." I asked him, "Do you love the name Satan or serpent more than Lucifer?" This question was my unmistakably negative answer for him. He replied angrily, "Then go and try your luck. You will see how far you can go to build the ideal world on earth." My children on earth will never allow you to realize this truth there. I love them, and they love my inherited habits. We are one. This world is mine. Why do the heavens and you not go to earth, take your few remaining people, and just leave us alone? I replied, the time is near when God will meet his unchanging children who are like him. On this day, you have to say goodbye to this earth. You will also lose your dominion over the low spiritual world, and you will be judged for your crimes together with the evil spirits. Then you will be defeated forever. He replied calmly, Go and try first to take away my dominion over the earth. I worked very hard to seize the whole world from the individual to the family, society and nation. It belongs solely to me now. Neither God, the heavens, nor anyone else can claim this dominion from me, contrary to the path of the principles. You will very quickly experience by yourself how high the price is to transform this fallen world into the ideal world. In the end, nothing will be left from you and nobody will remember you. In another dimension, I saw black smoke coming out of the mouth of human beings as they talked, which surrounded them like black clouds. They created a negative environment on earth, and now they do it in the spiritual world. The angels mentioned that these were people who talked about others behind their backs. As I traveled through another dark dimension, I saw spiritual beings which were resembling dark shadows. When they laid down, they turned into snakes, and when they stood up, you could hardly recognize human beings in them. Through the angels I found out that those were cruel kings or dictators on earth, and they were also responsible for the death of many people. The dark dimensions in the spiritual world are like black holes. Once you are caught in them, there is no way to come out. Only angels or spiritual beings with a light shining like a crystal can escape from there. Only a few righteous spiritual beings can pass through these dark dimensions. They lived on earth as their religion dictates and followed its teaching with a humble heart. Such spiritual beings mostly go into a neutral dimension of the spiritual world that corresponds to their light. The neutral spiritual world consists of dimensions in which one finds peace and has the opportunity to grow under the guidance of the angels. The beings live here according to their belief and the practice of their teaching. From time to time, such a spiritual being gets a special opportunity to get to a higher dimension in order to get to know the truth in more detail. The explanation of the truth is relative according to the spiritual development of the dimension. The truth does not change, only the expression of the truth according to the spiritual growth of each being. A comparison that can help to clarify it is our education system. First, we impart knowledge to the children of our society in the elementary school, then in the secondary or junior high schools, and possibly in universities. In each of these educational institutions, knowledge as well as ethical and moral values are linguistically and in terms of content differentiated and offered in detail. This is primarily related to the age-related intellectual and linguistic development of the students. Primary school pupils are explained with simple, picture-rich words how an X-ray picture is created. The same knowledge will be explained to physics students through the teaching of physical laws and their relationships. Roughly simplified, it is the same with the explanation of the spiritual truth, only with the difference that here the spiritual development of every person or being is decisive and not the physical age on earth. Only through the love for God can the fire for the spiritual development of a spirit on earth be kindled. God's love is the key and condition for the spirit to be able to experience spiritual truths at all. This master key also opens all other spiritual senses. Through our love for our eternal Creator, we receive light so that we can travel with our spirit in the different dimensions of eternity and get to know more spiritual truth there. Without this light, the gates of these dimensions would not open to anyone. In these realms of the spirit world, the human spiritual beings are taught, but advancement requires one's own efforts just like on earth. The rise to higher dimensions, however, does not only depend on the learning success. The gates of the higher dimensions remain closed, no matter how well the spiritual truth is understood and internalized, if your own love for God is not sufficient to bring more light into your spirit. On earth, school performances alone are the requirement for a higher education, but not in the spiritual world. Without a sincere, ever-developing love for our Heavenly Father, there is no progress. On Earth, we human beings try to discover secrets of science like physics, mathematics, chemistry, biology, etc. with our mind. Only what can be rationally understood we see as proven. The experience of spiritual truth goes far beyond a rational chain of thoughts which is only at home in the dimensions of the archangels. There, knowledge completes the path of truth. This does not mean that the beings there are not constantly discovering new spiritual truths. When a human spirit on the endless journey of its development to God reaches the golden dimensions of the heavens, there is no knowledge there because God's love is above the divine laws. These dimensions are not ruled by knowledge, laws, and systems, but only by our Heavenly Father's love. Everything which we experience or become aware of there happens out of love. It is the inheritance of the divine golden light, the feminine aspect of God's love. In the blue dimensions of eternity, we receive this heritage from the blue divine light, the male aspect of our Creator's love. Our spirit absorbs this gift like the fragrance of flowers. It opens and unfolds and shines in the eternal light of our Creator. When a spirit can enter these divine dimensions, it is chosen and able to take this inheritance and live with it. Everything is filled with light. Our spirit does not have to learn or understand this inheritance, but feels it deep in its heart as if it had always been a part of it. It is like a déjà vu without being a memory deception. When the spirit says, "Oh, I know, I remember, it is so," there are no questions and answers for the intellectual mind here, because the knowledge is neither at home or grows there, nor is it granted to enter there. In a very simplified way, we can compare this with an inheritance or a company handover on Earth. We humans do everything to ensure that our children receive the best education. We send them to elite schools, universities, etc. At the end of our lives, we pass everything on to our children because we assume that during their education, they acquired the knowledge and skills that are needed to successfully run a company. We give them something that they didn't build up themselves, but we created for them and left only for them. I know that mental explanations cannot be easily understood for a rational person. But there are also things on earth that cannot be explained in words but only experienced, such as pain or love. All these examples and analogies are in the truest sense of the word only explanatory crutches for something that we experience with our spirit or even absolutely have to feel. I now return to my original topic. All dimensions have only one thing in common. It takes a long time for spiritual beings to grow in them because they had to leave their physical bodies on earth. They act and believe in the spiritual world as in their earthly life. The spirit in the physical body on earth can be compared to the fruit of a tree, with the only difference that the fruit grown on earth can only be harvested in the spiritual world. The tree trunk is our human body, in which the spirit settles down on earth to grow and mature in it. I would like to give the following answer to my fellow men who think they cannot know how to lead their earthly life because they cannot see the spirit. Every farmer knows that if the seeds are put into the field, you have to fertilize the soil, water it, and if possible, harvest it when the sun is shining. The physical body was given to us by God, and this gives every spirit the same fertile soil, because in God's eyes all of His children are the same, regardless of their lineage, belief, or ethnicity. It is up to the farmer and thus to the human responsibility to decide when the seeds need to be fertilized and watered. Accordingly, each human being is responsible for the growth of the spirit, because just as every plant needs light to grow, the spirit can only develop and unfold in the love of God. If a wrong decision is made here, the fruit will only be small and, under certain circumstances, can only be harvested when it is unripe. If you look at this fallen world today and the immoral, not God-pleasing way of life of the people, it is not difficult to imagine that the fruits are not only immature when harvested, but have rotten and dark spots. Many plants will not even bear fruits because the seeds already rot in the soil. That is, the God-sent spirit could not develop on earth at all. Instead of going to a higher dimension after the death of the physical body, the spirit is now prevented from returning to its original dimension. According to its life on earth, the spiritual being has to continue his spiritual life in a lower, bad dimension now. I hope that my fellow men have now clearly understood that their spirit shows how they lived on earth and how they practiced their belief. Therefore, it is very important that everyone is aware of how he leads his life on earth. 3 elements are the driving forces for the destruction of the spiritual development or enlightenment of a spirit: the motivation, the direction taken, and the resulting actions shape the spirit forever. There are countless dimensions in hell as well as in the neutral and middle spiritual worlds. Once the ideal world of God is substantially established on earth, there is also hope for the dimensions mentioned above to be able to transform into better and higher realms. In the religious belief, paradise is already considered a very high dimension of heavens. In reality, it is not part of the heavens. Paradise consists of many, many dimensions, which are called growth stages. There, spiritual beings enter which already reached a certain level and partially fulfilled their purpose given by God on earth. The dimensions of paradise are by no means places where perfect spiritual beings live. If a being is one with God, it can reach dimensions far higher than those of the paradise. Here I want to talk about the truth and reality of the paradise. Until today, 95% of all people, including believers of all religions, were not able to reach paradise after their death. They all live in the lower or middle dimensions of the spiritual world. Only a few succeeded in reaching the neutral dimensions. Now, questions arise like, what kind of dimensions are there in paradise? Which spiritual standard do you need to enter the dimensions of paradise? Ever since human beings have lived in the world of Lucifer, there has been mental confusion around them. They practice and interpret religious values according to their own understanding. As I mentioned earlier, the spiritual beings must first reach the level at which they can respond to God's call to enter paradise. More specifically, the motivation of humanity on the religious path must first be clear. Men have to be directly aware of their longing for God. On the one hand, the desire to meet God and nobody else should be burning in them. On the other hand, people, especially believers, need to be aware that the prophets and saviors only show the way. In no case can they be the destination of the believers. God is the first and last destination for every human being. He is the origin and the true content of the life of mankind for whom it should yearn for. When men pray to God and open their hearts for the deepest love for our Creator, the deeds in their lives are also deeply connected to God and have the universal value to embrace the whole eternity. Then, already on earth, the human spirit would be filled with light and could travel with the grace of God in paradise or in higher dimensions, and not only after the death of the physical body. I already saw most of the dimensions of paradise and the higher dimensions above, but they are all empty. If the angel world allows good spiritual beings to reach the dimensions of paradise, they demand that they follow consistently the laws of these dimensions. On the one hand, the spiritual beings receive the education they need to grow. On the other hand, they get to know God better. The conditions in these dimensions are very strict and do not allow compromises. If the spiritual beings cannot comply with the prevailing laws or do not follow the level of their training during a conditionally approved visit in the lower or higher realms of paradise, the angels send them back where they belong to. These laws also apply to the neutral and middle dimensions. On the other hand, one should not forget that the spiritual beings have to wait a very long time to receive such an opportunity. My dear family of humanity, I poured out my heart to express my observations and experiences. I want to let you know what everyone can do in his life to follow this path without being stopped by the barriers of the spiritual world. When saints or saviors, for example Krishna, Buddha, Abraham, Jesus, Muhammad, or others who received the mission through the angels or heavens, came to paradise after death, they received the recognition they deserved and were honored for it by the heavens. It doesn't matter what religion these messengers belonged to. Because of this, they can travel in the heavens and have the opportunity to meet countless other beings in the spiritual world. Such privileges are a tribute to their efforts to bring mankind back home. They had the courage to respond to the call of heavens. Their spirit is therefore filled with light. According to the radiation of their light, they can travel with high speed. This can be with speed of light, but also much faster. Light means life in the spiritual world. The more light they have in their spirits, the faster they can travel in the spiritual world, be it with speed of light or with speeds far beyond our imagination. Note: I reported extensively on the phenomena of life after death in other publications. See attachment.